Hi, I'm Patrick Cobb with AARP South Carolina. We're pleased to be a sponsor of the Charleston Post and Courier's Pints and Politics series. AARP is a nonprofit organization, so we don't endorse candidates. For more information, go to aarp.org/SC.
Hello, welcome to our third virtual Pints and Politics. I'm Autumn Phillips, managing editor of the Post and Courier. We've had Nancy Mace here once before during the primary, the GOP primary. We had three of the four candidates. Nancy Mace won that race, and she's back to talk to us as we edge toward the general. I want to talk to you a little bit about things we have coming up. Our political reporter, Tom Novelli, is going to be covering this race. He's offering 4 stories in the next month. If you have a pen, write this down so that you can follow along. September 13th, he's going to look at the environment and how that's playing into this race. On September 27th, he'll look at healthcare. October 11th, he'll look at the economic recovery. And October 25th, he'll look at veterans issues. Before we get started, I want to take a minute and thank our sponsors, AARP of South Carolina. They have generously sponsored this entire year of Pints and Politics. And I also want to thank Palmetto Brewery, where we have been multiple times, for always opening their venue to us. Now I'll turn it over to our moderators. To my left is Andy Shane. He's our Columbia Bureau Chief and has been covering politics in South Carolina for 8 years. And to my right is political editor Skylar Croft, and he has been covering politics in South Carolina for more than 30 years. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Welcome. We appreciate this very, very much.
And thank you for having me, Andy and Skylar. I've known y'all for a very long time and appreciate y'all putting the time and the effort to put these Pints and Politics events together. It's great for everybody in the community.
Great. All right. Well, let's get in the first question here. And so we're in a bar.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a beer drinker? Do you have a local favorite? And your opponent, Joe Cunningham, seems to be getting a lot of mileage out of his support for the beer industry in the first district.
No, for sure. I mean, I'm a vodka person. I love my vodka sodas, but if I'm drinking beer, I'm drinking a light one. I love Hogarten. It's probably my favorite beer when I am drinking, but usually you'll see me sipping on a vodka soda with a splash of lime on most times. So
tasty in the hottest day of the year.
There are 0 carbs in a vodka soda, at least, with some of the brands. So I'm a big fan. So
sounds like a good summer drink.
Yeah.
So last week we had the Republican National Convention. How
Right.
much of it did you watch, and what did you think?
Yeah, I watched about half of it. It was much easier because, typically in a normal election year, when you have your convention, it's 8 hours a day. It's a long day, but because they pared it down to an hour and a half a day, I was most excited about seeing Ambassador Nikki Haley and Senator Tim Scott take the stage the same night. And South Carolina has grown so many great folks over the years that are stewards of our community and our state, and they just shined on the national stage and represented all of us so well. And I appreciated their message of hope and their roots and where they come from, the value of hard work, because I have a similar background. I grew up in Goose Creek, and I dropped out of high school at 17, and one of my first jobs was waiting tables at a Waffle House, and here we are today, the Republican nominee for Congress, going from the Waffle House to the U.S. House. And so I always appreciate those stories of hard work and values that represent all of us here in South Carolina. So that was exciting.
Well, it's strange that you bring up Senator Scott, because I counted how many times he mentioned Joe Biden during his talk.
How many times was it?
I believe it was about 14.
Okay.
And he mentioned the president.
I didn't count.
A dozen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
What I'd like to do with you is, without mentioning Joe Biden, explain to our viewers why Donald Trump is the better choice for president heading into November.
Right. Regardless of whether or not you like the president's Twitter account, it's really his policies, particularly his economic policies. So previous to COVID-19, I've talked a lot about this. I've been in business for 21 years, and I understand as a state lawmaker, as a businesswoman, that small businesses really are the backbone of South Carolina, but in particularly in the Low Country. And previous to COVID-19, here in the Low Country, our unemployment rate was 1.86%. here. And so if you wanted a job, you could have a job. And if you were working at entry level at a fast food franchise, and I spoke to several fast food franchise owners last year. They were paying their employees $15 an hour, and some were going to increase their minimum wage entry to 20 just to keep their talent in the restaurant. And so it was remarkable that you didn't need the government to mandate a wage, but because of the economic conditions, because of lower taxes, businesses then invested in their employees and reinvested in their businesses. The economy was so much better for everybody. And it was the lowest unemployment rate for women, for African Americans, for Hispanics, for everybody in generations. And when you look at where we are today, I really do fear for what our economy is going to look like under Joe Biden. Just today or yesterday, I read an article that our U.S. debt now exceeds the size of the U.S. economy, and it hasn't been that bad since World War II. We're not in World War II right now, yet Republicans and Democrats both alike keep spending more money. And this is I say a bipartisan issue because they're both part of the problem. Anytime the Democrats wanted more spending on social programs or welfare programs, the Republicans then say, well, give us more money for defense spending. And so neither side are holding each other accountable right now. And then COVID-19 happens and hits us, and we're in even more dire straits because they're continuing to spend more money without any cuts in spending. I'm a single working mom, and I have to balance my checkbook. I think the federal government should too. But when I look at the economic policies, so when I look at Joe Biden wants to raise taxes. Under Joe Biden's policy for small businesses, he wants small business to pay unrealized capital gains taxes on money that hasn't been realized on property and businesses and everything else. And so that's unacceptable. And we're already in a broken state because of the dire situation that we have with coronavirus. And I believe that Joe Biden's policies are going to make it worse for everybody. And so I want to see us have more economic prosperity and get through this some way or somehow. And I do know that a Trump presidency brings the economic balance, I believe, much better than Joe Biden does.
Let me get back to the convention.
Yeah.
There was little mention of either the pandemic that we're going through,
right,
and of the racial strife that we have been
right,
encountering in the past, basically since Memorial Day.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a mistake? And what are your views? What would you have addressed if you were had a chance to maybe speak at the convention yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for us as Republicans to address these issues. For me personally, having grown up here in the Low Country, these issues are personal. And so if you've grown up here or you just walk the streets one afternoon, you can literally see the difference between rich and poor in this town is literally black and white in many cases, in many communities. And I do believe that our fiscally conservative policies are the compassionate policies. And as a Republican, I've done what even most Democrats only talk about doing. Let's talk about criminal justice reform or prison reform. Governor McMaster signed my prison reform bill into law just a few months ago. And I think it's very rare when you see a Republican raise their hand and say, these issues are really important to all of us. And so I've made it as a state lawmaker over the last 3 years. I've focused on fiscal policy that's important. I think that helps every community. The president's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is a reason why our unemployment was so low nationally and here locally, as well as a big impetus behind it. But also, in 2018, there was a bipartisan bill that the president signed into law for federal prison reform, the First Step Act. And so these are things that are important that we've actually done and should be spoken about when you're talking about George Floyd. And Charleston has had its own set of tragedy. And so when Mother Emanuel, the Emanuel 9. I know that when that happened, I was living here. I helped start a scholarship for African American students from AME communities to go to the Citadel. And so these are things that many of us have done, but we don't speak about it. And I think that the Republicans do have a problem with how they message our policy. I know I'm getting hit on by national Democrats right now for wanting to repeal our god-awful healthcare system, Obamacare. And they're saying that I want everyone with a pre-existing condition not to have health care. And it's all BS and it's all a lie. And so I know firsthand, I have a pre-existing condition myself. I know I've struggled in the past with it. And at one point, several years ago, I was trying to get reinsured and I had to wait 9 months. My family could get insurance, but I could not because of my pre-existing condition. And so when we experience these things firsthand, as I have in many cases, I want to take what I've learned and make it into policy. And I want everyone that has those issues, I want them to get coverage. But we've got to be able to talk about it.
What should be the messaging on the pandemic? I mean, again, there wasn't a lot of conversation about during the convention about, you know, the number of people who died, the depth of it, and there was some feeling that maybe it was being glossed over a little bit. Is there some messaging that needs to be done with
No,
it?
certainly we've got to look at the statistics and the data, and it's not just the United States. It isn't just the United States that's suffering under the pandemic. Literally, the majority of the world is seeing spikes. I do believe that as Republicans, we have to do a better job of setting the example, which is why when I got COVID-19, I was very, very sick, and I made no bones about it. I had one afternoon where my oldest, my son, turned to me and he said, "Mommy, you sound like Darth Vader when you breathe." And my blood oxygen level at that moment was about 87. And it was fluctuating that afternoon, and I was on the phone with my doctor. We were monitoring it to see if I needed to go to the hospital to get steroid injection and move forward with another, go to the hospital and get better and get that steroid injection. But I've taken it very seriously. And so anywhere I go, I'm wearing my mask, and I'm encouraging people in every speech that I give to wear a mask, because unless you know someone who has had it or it's personal to you, you may not take it as seriously. And the social distancing, 6 feet apart, anytime that we've done an event, we've had smaller numbers. We've been 6 feet apart, and encourage everyone to wash their hands before and after every event and everything. And so it is up to us, and it's incumbent upon us. Even if you had a COVID test in 24 hours, the last 24 hours, you should still be wearing a mask, and you should still be social distancing. And, that's problematic when we're not setting the example. I know that South Carolina, in the last 7 weeks, we've done a great job of bringing our numbers down. We were over 2,000 a day. Now we're less than 1,000 again. And I think it's because we've all encouraged each other, our leaders in our community, to do the right thing. And it's incumbent upon all of us, regardless of your political affiliation, to make sure that we move forward in a safe direction. And we've got to set the example.
That kind of leads into our next question. This is our AARP sponsor question.
Right.
Americans pay the highest prescription drug prices in the world.
Right.
If elected, how will you cut prescription drug prices for all Americans?
Right. And AARP, I believe, is also a political organization that supports my opponent. I do appreciate the question, but I do want folks to know that they're not unbiased in this at all. There are several things that we can do. I believe that repealing Obamacare is the first step, but Republicans have to have a system that can replace that. Price transparency on pharmaceuticals, price transparency on procedures, inpatient, outpatient, surgical procedures, you name it. Those are small steps under Obamacare right now. If we were not able to repeal it, and I don't believe we would anytime soon, but those are small steps that we can take to allow folks to know what prescription pricing is and to be able to price shop. One of the things that we've got to do, and I've led on this effort at the state level, is repeal numerous regulations in the healthcare space. So, for example, I've led an effort to repeal our certificate of need laws here in South Carolina, which would allow more people to have greater access to care, higher quality care at lower prices, because we know when there's more competition in the market, that you can get better access to care. One of the things that I do support that would apply to pharmaceuticals or procedures, Senator Rand Paul has a bill that he's filed multiple times called S222, and it would fully replace Obamacare. But one of the things that it allows you to do is to shop for insurance over state lines. Having just that little bit of competition will allow people better access to insurance, for example, better coverage for pharmaceuticals and those sorts of things. But the other things that we can do also is increase the HSA caps. Right now, they're very limited in the amount of money you can put into that every year. There should be no caps on that. Those HSA fees or those accounts should pay for your premiums, your copays, your pharmaceuticals, everything. You shouldn't have to pay taxes on that either. And so all of those things combined would help us. One of the other things that people should be able to do, and this is under S222 also, but I believe you could do it under Obamacare, whether we repeal it or not. But one of the things that when I was starting my own company, when my children were very small, I could not afford Cobra. For a family of 4 at that time, it was between $1,500 and $2,000 a month. And I was starting my own business and wasn't sure how much income I was going to have. So I had the opportunity to purchase catastrophic insurance. And for a family of 4 at that time, it was $250 a month. Now you had a high deductible, but very low premiums. And that year I learned that I discovered I have a pre-existing condition. One of my children was in the ER with a broken elbow. The other one was in the ER with stitches because we had an accident. And we negotiated all of our prices in cash when we had that, and spent about $5,000 for our health care that year. Had we had insurance, our costs would have been enormously higher with the premiums, the deductibles, the co-pays, and everything else. And so one of the things we've got to do under Obamacare right now, you can't buy catastrophic insurance over the age of 30. So why is there an artificial cap on the age range that you can do that? I think that that's untenable. I don't think that's realistic, and I think that's hurtful to many hardworking Americans. And again, we've got to do something for folks that have pre-existing conditions and make sure that we cover those individuals and take care of them, because you can't have a lapse in insurance. I know that if I do, it's extremely problematic for those of us that have that. So that has to be taken care of as well. But S 222, if I were in Congress, I would file a companion bill. Would be one of the first things I would do to that. But also, I would find ways and incrementally that we can modify Obamacare to make it better, more affordable, more accessible, and greater care for everybody. So.
All right. Well, changing topics
Okay.
a little bit here. So you have said you're against offshore drilling,
Correct.
but it should be up to the states to decide.
Correct.
Unlike your opponent who had said that there should be a federal ban.
Right.
But is there a role for Congress in this? And then I have a follow-up after
Yeah,
that.
I mean, of course there is. There are federal waters off of the state's shores. But here's the thing. I am not about gimmicks. I believe that Congressman Cunningham's bill is a gimmick. I mean, it's just for show. It's not going anywhere fast. It has literally zero possibility of ever becoming law, because it has zero chances of ever passing both chambers of Congress to get to the president's desk to sign. And I really believe when we're talking about these issues, you have to take a truly bipartisan approach. Congressman Cunningham, no one other than himself from South Carolina's delegation even voted for his bill. And if you're going to move the ball forward, then let's really move the ball forward. And I think that when I look at these issues, I want to do it in a realistic way. I don't like to file bills just to make myself look good or to make a newspaper headline. That's not moving those issues forward. And I have been a conservationist my entire life. I learned it from my father, who's an avid hunter, growing up hunting with him, and how he took care of the land and took care of the deer and the ducks and everything on the land. I even compost at my house. I make dirt. I garden organic vegetables at my home as well, and we eat them. But I've always been against offshore drilling. The very first bill I ever filed as a state lawmaker was against offshore drilling. The very first rally I ever spoke at as a state lawmaker was an anti-offshore drilling rally. And I've even stood shoulder to shoulder at an anti-seismic testing event in downtown Charleston at the federal courthouse, shoulder to shoulder with Congressman Cunningham, opposing seismic testing. And I was the only Republican that cold December morning in 2018 standing there at that event. And so I'm a true believer. I want to move the ball forward, but you've got to do it in a way that Republicans and Democrats can get along. And I do believe, and this is something I learned from Congressman Sanford and hearing him speak on these issues, on it is the role of federalism and allowing states to have the right to make that decision. Because if we do that, then I do believe you're going to get more bipartisan support. You're going to have a bill that can realistically pass both chambers of Congress and get to the president's desk for signature. And
so
that's what it's about.
No problem. Let me bring up the states for a
Yeah.
moment. Let's do a what if. What if North Carolina and Georgia approve offshore drilling? What would you do about it? They're bookending us.
Right. Well, that would be their choice at that point. But until we get, you can't ask for the whole the whole kit and caboodle. It's not going to work. He's passed this bill out of the House. It's not going anywhere in the Senate. So you've got to try to do it as a way to get
But
states
again,
the right.
let's just say North
Yeah.
Carolina and Georgia do this.
There's nothing
what
that
is
South
it?
Carolina could do, but as South Carolina as a state already, regardless of Congressman Cunningham's bill, South Carolina as a state already, we've effectively banned offshore drilling, and we do it through a provision within our budget every year, and we pass it every year as part of our budget. So as a state, our state leaders, Senator Chip Kansen, Senator Tom Davis, Governor McMaster, and folks in the House, they do it every year already. South Carolina can't control what other states do, but I truly believe you have to, that's the first step. If you want to truly get somewhere on this issue, then you have to give states the option, because there's no way we can get a bill passed out of both chambers without that. If you have that provision where you have states given the choice, the decision to make that themselves, that is a bill we can pass. And I would rather see something done on it than absolutely nothing. Because right now, Congressman Cunningham's bill is getting us nowhere. It's going nowhere. And I think it is a lie, it's fraud, and it's deceitful to think that his bill is going to push the needle on this issue any further than it already is, because it's not going anywhere. And the other thing that I want folks to know too is that I have a higher conservation voting rating than most Democrats in this state. My record with the conservation voters of South Carolina is 98%. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that he and I are on the same side of the issue. This is not an argument. We want to ban it. I'd love to ban it all along the Atlantic coast, but that's just not going to happen when you have other folks, Republicans in South Carolina on the Energy Committee, and get to control much of that. We've got to find ways that we can work with folks on this issue, particularly Republicans in my own caucus, to move the ball forward. And the only way you're going to do it if you give states the rights to do it. That's the only way you can move the issue forward at all at this juncture.
Thank you. I've got a question and I'll have a follow-up, but
I'm going to sip my beer while you're you're doing that.
the Chamber of Commerce this week, the U.S. Chamber, endorsed your opponent.
Right.
Usually a very Republican-leaning organization,
Right.
but it's gone in the other direction, endorsing close to 20 other Democrats.
Right.
How do you walk into business now today and say, hey, look, the Chamber doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm the better choice for business. How do you persuasively sell that?
Right. Well, I mean, our local chambers are not endorsing Congressman Cunningham, and the U.S. Chamber of U.S. Chamber has looked at 20 to 30 Democrats nationally. Traditionally, they do endorse Republicans, and they picked some of the most vulnerable Democrats and went with it a few days ago. What I say to that is I would put my record of low taxes and job creation and education over Congressman Cunningham's any day of the week. I truly believe that my fiscal conservative record, which is one of the most fiscally conservative records in the General Assembly. In 2019, I won the Taxpayer Hero Award from the South Carolina Club for Growth. I've been endorsed by some of the most fiscally conservative groups that promote the free market, competition in the market, that are pro-business, pro-small business. I put up my record any day against him, and I'm looking forward to the debate that y'all are going to have at the end of September so we can talk about those issues and talk about our record.
Do you believe that the minimum wage, which is now $7.25, should be increased, or are you philosophically, as a Republican, against a federal minimum wage at all?
Philosophically, as someone who believes in the free market, who believes in competition, who believes that businesses have a better idea and should have the say in wages, I'm against increasing the federal minimum wage. And what I spoke about earlier when we first got started, when pre-COVID-19, I talked to many business owners here in town, trying to understand what their issues were at the federal level, because federal, state, and local issues in business are all very different. But when I looked at how prosperous our economy was, 1.86 unemployment here in the low country, where you were working at a fast food restaurant, your entry-level wage was $15 an hour. And if the federal government had mandated that lower, we didn't need that to happen, because under lower taxes, under the free market, under competition, the wages go up. And that's how supply and demand works. That's how the free market works. And these are very different. My opponent believes that the federal government should mandate wages. And I believe that if you are pro-business, that you allow the free market to work, you allow those wages to be determined based on consumer supply and demand. So I'm more pro-business in that respect.
Okay, so it's campaign season, and
Yes.
there are a lot of advertisements that
Of
are out,
course.
and a lot of advertisements from your opponent and from groups that say a lot of things about some of your views.
Right.
I'm going to give you 3 of them, and I'd like
Okay.
you to go ahead and counter them or
Yeah.
say what you think about them. Okay, so the
Okay.
3 issues that come up, fairly common,
Okay.
are number one, that you support you support raising the retirement age for Social Security, you support privatizing Medicare, and that you thought South Carolina's economy should have opened sooner as a result of the COVID-19
Okay.
restrictions. So
These are not yet. These are not yes or no. So one at a time.
No, one at a time.
Yeah,
I'm just giving you all 3
You
of them.
can't,
And there you
on
go.
economic policy, you can't just be up or down, yes or no. So the first one was on raising the age
Yeah. So the
under
first one was raising the age
Medicare.
for raising the retirement age for Social Security.
Retirement age of Social Security, right? So, yes. So I know that my generation. I'm 42. No one in my generation or younger believes that we're going to have Social Security, or if we do have it, it's going to be far less than it is today. And so I think that anyone that tells you they're not going to touch Social Security, that it's going to be the same 30 years from now, shouldn't be able to be in office, because that's just a total lie. We do have to do something. And I know that I'm a product of Ronald Reagan. I watched him growing up when I was a kid in the 80s. And one of the things that he did is he did raise the age of Social Security retirement from 65 to 67. We're living longer. We have fewer children. The system is completely broken. And I do believe gradually over time that we do have to look at raising the age. Now, that is not for anybody who's near retirement now. If you're over the age of, you're 50, 55 or older now, then that doesn't, I'm talking about my generation that we will be working longer. And we all know realistically that it's not going to be there unless we make serious changes to the system. And I do believe in something called the penny plan that does not touch Social Security. But if we don't get our spending under control, I don't know where the money is going to come from. So that's why I support that effort as a gradual effort. For my generation and younger generations, it would not affect anyone that is close to retirement today.
So number 2 was privatizing Medicare.
Right. So Medicare, I mean, trillions of dollars in debt. There's a massive hole in Medicare. There are a couple of things that I think that we could do, and one of them is we could put seniors on the federal health care plan. That would save billions of dollars if we did that. I think that if you were able to have more private options, S222 that Senator Rand Paul has would allow more people to have greater access to lower cost healthcare and insurance if you had competition across state lines. These are issues that we're going to have to address. And if the federal government doesn't get their spending under control, there's going to be no money left for Medicare or anything else. So, and if you look at the crisis we're in right now, we've got to start making changes to all of these programs.
And finally, that we should have reopened the economy sooner when the COVID-19 pandemic started.
Right. I believe I wrote an op-ed in your paper about reopening the economy. There are other countries that have done it safely. If we take certain safety precautions and guidelines, more folks can get back to work, wearing masks, washing hands, being socially distanced. I am not a fan of completely shutting down the economy. We can't afford to do so. I'm a single working mom right now, and I know how tough it is for other single moms or single parents that are out there, or even parents that both work or just one works. This is an incredibly difficult time, and we cannot steal our children's futures or people's livelihoods away from them. And if the federal government, there's just so much they could be doing right now. We've got to take those precautions. We've got to at least be partially open, but do it in a safe manner. Follow the guidelines of the CDC, follow the guidelines of our local health officials to do it in a safe manner. We can enjoy a high quality of life. The folks that we really have to look out for right now, and that should be staying home, are those who are most vulnerable, those who are older than 60, who have underlying health conditions. Those are the people that we really have to protect. And people that are under those ages and don't have underlying health conditions, if they want to go back to work, to pay their rent, pay their bills, put food on the table, they should have the opportunity and the ability to do so in a safe manner.
Yeah, Congressman Cunningham is running a lot of ads and boasting a lot about how separate he is from his leadership and things that are against.
He's not, but right.
My question isn't so much about your opinion about what the senator.
I'm going to give you my opinion, though. Yeah.
But you can get that in.
Yeah.
But what specifically do you see Republican leadership is wrong about? Name like 3 areas that you see that the the leadership is just on the wrong path. That the decisions and where they're going at is just not what you agree with.
Right. Well, leadership on both sides. And I mentioned earlier, our economic policy, our spending right now. I mean, you cannot continue to provide unemployment at these levels in perpetuity without addressing the spending problem that we have, or at least looking at the money that we're spending overseas when we could be rebuilding here at home and creating jobs rather than spending money in countries that hate us and want to burn our flag and kill all of us. So spending is a big problem for both Republicans and Democrats. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. Both sides of the House of both parties have ratcheted up our spending. And as I mentioned earlier, Democrats always want more money for social programs, welfare programs, and then the response to that, the balance on the other side is, well, Republicans want greater defense spending. And so nobody is holding the other side accountable. We've got to send people to Washington who are willing to say no. And anytime Republicans in the state General Assembly have wanted to spend too much, I've said no. I've voted against it. I've fought to lower taxes. I fought to get more money into taxpayers' hands and return some of that money because I know that individuals and families and businesses better spend those dollars than the government does. Congressman Cunningham believes differently. I mean, he's voted with Nancy Pelosi almost 90% of the time. That is not reflective of the district in any way, shape, or form. He's only been with the president about 8% of the time. And it's the president's economic policies of lower taxes that generated such great unemployment in this country. And we've got to get back to that. We've got to get through this crisis, but we've got to start looking at our spending. And we've got to look at spending right now during this crisis. If we're going to continue with unemployment, then we've got to cut spending. And we're not seeing either side address that issue at all right now.
Based on the spending comments, would you support, and does the next COVID recovery package back to everyone, does it need to be at the same level where everyone got $1,200?
Right. No, I think it needs. So what we did, I originally supported the stimulus program. I mean, the government shut everything down. You can't shut an entire nation down and not help people who are in very deep strains financially and health-wise. And so I supported that initially. But when we started to reopen the economy, we couldn't continue the $600 extra a week in unemployment. I talked to so many business owners where that actually incentivize unemployment. When they were ready to reopen and ask their employees to come back to work, even part-time, many employees didn't want to do it because they were making more money at home than they would on the job. And, for all that it is, I know that Congressman Cunningham has criticized Republicans for taking that position. But when you incentivize unemployment, our economy is going to be in worse shape. And so we've got to do what we can for those who cannot work or there's no opportunities to go back to work. And whether that's part-time unemployment for part-time work or an extension of federal unemployment, but not at that level, not at $600 a week. There are measures we can take where we don't incentivize that and perhaps put a cap on it to up to 2/3 of someone's previous wages so that we can incentivize opportunities for people to go back to work. There are opportunities to work and we need to encourage that for those that want to.
So my next question,
Yes,
excuse
sir.
me, my next question comes from our reader.
Okay.
We obviously are taking reader questions during these Pints and
Right.
Politics. So the question that they asked was, do you believe in climate change? And if so, what do you believe we should do to act to counter it? Obviously with some clean energy initiatives.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of mixed on this. I'm not a scientist, and I've read science on both sides of this issue. To me, it's not clear cut. I know that here in downtown Charleston, we're seeing rising sea levels, and that could be a product of the climate, but that's also partially a product of the peninsula being largely built on landfill in many places. And so I'm a big person that wants to look at the data, want to look at the statistics. I do support clean energy initiatives. I've supported solar efforts at the state level, and I would continue to do that at the federal level. But one of the things that I think is missing as part of this conversation, and you can look at, there's so much going on environmentally right now, but the United States cannot be the only country that is putting forth this effort because we're going to fail. And so we've got to find ways to help incentivize other countries. If we're going to do it, how can we incentivize other people around the world to do it? Because when you look at other countries and some of the problems they're having environmentally with air quality, it's not just the United States, and it shouldn't just be us that's doing this. But I have supported green energy, clean energy initiatives at the state level. I would continue to do so at the federal level.
let me ask
Yeah.
a follow-up, because you mentioned at the beginning of your answer that you're not sure.
Right.
What is it exactly you're not sure about? What might be the other causes of it, of what's happening, of the
Yeah.
rising sea levels, of what we're
Right.
seeing, and the more constant flooding that we're
Right.
seeing here in the Low Country? What are
Mhm.
some of the other possibilities
So if
in
you
your
look
mind?
at the history of Earth, we've had climate changes many times, over 130 times over millions of years. And so, part of it might be man-made, part of it might be just natural environmental causes as part of the cycle of Earth. And so I'm not a scientist, but I like to read both sides of the issue so that I can kind of have an understanding. I've read about glaciers melting in one area, but yet they're growing in others. And so, but I do know locally here, flooding is a massive issue. And we do have sea levels rising for whatever reason here on the peninsula. And our peninsula is also sinking. So we get a double whammy there. I am part of the Seawall Coalition. I was one of the first people to sign onto it when I was a state lawmaker 3 years ago when I just got elected. But because I'm not a scientist, I like to read both sides of the issue. I do believe that Republicans are doing a better job on it, but there's more that we can do and should be doing and be part of that conversation. So I do think there's opportunity for Republicans and Democrats to come together. I don't think we should be attacking people that believe it or don't believe it. I think it's more complicated than people really realize. You can't say one or the other when there's data on both sides of the issue. And I read about scientists that are flipped from one side to the other on both ways. And so it's hard to understand and know which one is right. So I think collectively we should be doing what we can to improve our environment 100% and support that. But also I want to find ways for other countries to incentivize them to do the same. It can't just be us, because we will not succeed. We can't cure everything around our planet, just ourselves.
I looked at your campaign website, and I looked at what you saw and said about securing the border. Does not mention any support for President Trump's call for a border wall.
Right.
You mentioned implementing all necessary border control and visual control systems and more funds devoted to overall security. Is the Trump border wall, does that fit into your platform at all, or is it just a bad idea?
Well, the border wall is something that Republicans and Democrats wanted years ago. Before Trump was president, Democrats were voting for funding for the wall. Then Trump became president, and it was one of his messages, and now they don't support the wall. I support all forms, any form of border security, whether that's a wall, a fence, or aerial, or more border patrol down there. I mean, there's just so many different ways you can do this. Even though South Carolina is not along the border, we do have issues that are related to, I believe, border security, whether that's human trafficking, sex trafficking, drugs, drug trafficking, the opioid crisis. Border security is a serious matter. And I believe it was last summer, a year ago, there were folks in Congress that voted to send funding for border security in other countries, but wouldn't vote for border security in our country. And that includes Congressman Cunningham. And so I think it's a real mistake to ignore the issue just because Trump is president. Whether it's a wall or a fence or aerial or more border patrol, it's something we have to take seriously.
But do you support what the president is doing by pushing for hundreds of miles of wall?
If it will be effective, sure. Yeah, I support border security, period. So.
Right. So let's talk about. I was going to say, let's talk about.
I like that. All right.
I was trying to think of an interesting segue into this with walls, but I mean, because I guess there are walls at the Citadel. But
yes.
When you think of that, but you have a built-in network because of the Citadel.
I sure do.
How has that played out for you so far in this campaign? And what would be your advice to others who want to tap into that network themselves, as they are maybe obviously for recent grads from the Citadel and how they should be doing that? Yeah.
Now the Citadel has an enormously strong alumni network, and had I not, I don't know where I would be without the Citadel, because the Citadel literally saved my life. And when I tell my story of dropping out of school and being at this crossroads in life, where was I going to go? Was I going to finish up? Was I not? And was I going to go to college or continue to waitress? And those sorts of things. When the Citadel came into my life, it literally changed everything for me. And I believe a lot of alumni, the vast majority of them, they are so supportive of my campaign, whether that's writing a check or knocking on a door, planting a yard sign, or donating their time, talent, and treasure. they're all in. And it's very humbling because, as you all know, if you were here back during that time, it was a controversial time in the mid-90s to have women go to the Citadel, and not everybody was on board. But when I look at 21 years later since graduation and graduating from there, how far we've come as an institution, as a college, and as an alumni network, that they have just fully embraced me as a businesswoman, as a state lawmaker, and now in my run for Congress. It is enormous, and it's deeply, deeply humbling. And I would do anything for a fellow alumnus, just like I would anything for anybody who's a resident of South Carolina.
Well, let me ask this. Do you
Yeah.
run into people who are still mad about
Not
about
really.
that?
I really don't. I know, I'm sure there are a handful of people that still are not fans of it, but by and large, 99.9% of the people that I talk to are very supportive, and they know where I've come from. They know my story. They know how hard I have worked to get to where I am today, and that I credit that school with saving my life and pointing me in a direction that I otherwise would not have turned in. And so, no, it's not really come up at all in the last couple of years, I guess, which is surprising maybe, but not really. I mean, people just, over time, a lot of grads have had daughters that have gone on to become cadets, or they have women in their family that want to go there, and they're fully supportive of it now. And I look at the school now, and I'm not even sure I could get it anymore. The standards are so high there. They've done an enormous job of moving forward over the last 20 or so years. They've done a great job. It's a great leadership opportunity there. Yeah.
Well, we opened questions from viewers and audience and Post-Courier subscribers.
Right.
This came from a reader. One of the main reasons why I'm a Republican is because I am pro-medical freedom.
Right.
With Democrats threatening to mandate masks for everyone and force mandatory coronavirus vaccinations, how will you protect us from this if Biden gets elected? Let me expound on that too. That's interesting.
Great question.
What's good is a vaccination program if not everyone is taking part? If there's a weak link, that means the virus doesn't go away.
Right. Well, in terms of vaccinations, and one of my children had a vaccine reaction when they were about 18 months old. And it was very, very scary. And so I'm one of those folks that take vaccination seriously. I've vaccinated my children over time, doing one or two at a time over a long period of time so that they would not get a vaccine reaction. So as a mom, it's something that it concerns me as a mom if there's going to be a federal mandate on a very brand new vaccine that wouldn't have a long time for trials to know what kind of effect it would have, both short-term and long-term. I hope and pray they get a COVID-19 vaccination. I was very, very sick, and I don't want anybody else to get it. So from that perspective, it's incumbent upon us to encourage people to do that, but we don't know yet what the short or long-term consequences might be either, and if it will be effective. So is it going to be something where you have to get a flu shot every season? Is it seasonal, or is it something you can do one time and you're covered for life? And so there's just so much that we don't know about it, but I hope and pray that we get one very, very soon, and that it has gone through all the clinical trials needed so that it's safe for folks to do, and because that's really important. Just like the masks, we've got to encourage people to wear them and wash their hands and be socially distanced, because this is a serious illness and it doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon. And because South Carolina and our governor and our local leaders took a stance on encouraging everyone to wear a mask, we were able to cut our numbers, and we did that as a community, and that was enormous, and we've got to continue to do that.
Seeing how we're here in a brewery, I'm gonna put a party foul rule on you here.
Okay.
In this answer, you cannot mention
Uh-oh.
Nancy Pelosi. What specifically do you think Joe Cunningham has been wrong about the first district, again, without mentioning Nancy Pelosi in your answer?
Right. I believe a lot of what Congressman Cunningham, don't get me wrong, he's a nice guy. I've met him. He's someone you want to sit down with and probably have a chat with at a brewery. But in terms of effectiveness as a leader, in terms of putting forth policy that has a plan of actually getting done, I don't believe that he curries favor here in the 1st Congressional District. His policies, his voting record are not in line with fiscal conservatives here. I don't believe his policies are in line with conservationists who are here, because his offshore drilling bill is a complete and total gimmick. And when you look at the ads that are running today, they're all about offshore drilling. Well, first of all, seismic testing was done in 1977. There is nothing off the coast that will last more than a few days. And that issue really is moot because the state has effectively already banned it. We do it every year in the budget. We are facing an enormous crisis where people are dying or hospitalized from COVID-19. Businesses are struggling or worse, failing, and people are being pulled out of their cars and beaten to death in the streets because of the riots. And I had a very dear friend of mine beaten during the night of the King Street riots. And we had such a failure of leadership. He stood side by side with our mayor who failed the night after the riots. I want leadership. I want fiscal conservative values. I want unemployment back down low. I want our economy safely reopened. I want a fiscal conservative who understands economic policy. I want a conservationist who's willing to move the ball forward and not put forth gimmicks. Shooting a horn in a committee meeting isn't going to solve seismic testing. We need a bill that actually has a chance of passing. And so I'm about getting results and not about getting headlines. And I'm also not going to lie to people about my record. As we learned recently, he's taken money from big oil as well. And I want transparency. I want honesty. I'm not going to lie to people to get elected. I came here tonight. I'm willing to be here tonight. I'm willing to have anyone ask me any question anytime about anything. I'm willing to debate him as many times as he is in for. I think it's really important that people have choices and see the difference between a true conservationist and a fiscal conservative and someone that has grown up here and understands the issues better than anyone, and no one's going to work harder than I will for the people of this district.
Well, you opened yourself up now because you
Okay.
said you will take any question. So if you win this seat in November, you'll likely be seated in the freshman class with Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Okay,
who has voiced support for the QAnon conspiracy.
right.
Lindsey Graham recently called QAnon, and this is his words, he called them batshit crazy.
I would agree with that. I don't really know much. Yeah, okay.
Is the group batshit crazy, and can you work with someone who supports conspiracy theories that include that a plane did not fly into the Pentagon
Yeah,
on 9/11?
I don't really know much about QAnon. It's not
That's the
in my
Republican
circle.
line. Every Republican says they don't know anything
I
about
don't know
it.
anything about it, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a realist. And if Senator Graham calls them batshit crazy, then by golly, they're batshit crazy. I think what we see right now is we see such division. It's on both sides of the party. We've got to be able to work with everybody. I don't care if you have an R or a D behind your name. We've got to find ways that we can work together. And so I'm willing to work with anyone on an issue that I feel is important to the people of the 1st Congressional District, whether that is on healthcare, whether that's on COVID-19 or business, the economy, taxes, the environment. We've got to find ways that we can reach across the aisle and work with people. And while I have one of the most fiscally conservative records in the General Assembly, I have a history of reaching across the aisle and working together. When my prison reform bill passed the State House and went to the desk of the governor to be signed into law, not a single person voted against it. It was unanimous. It was 100% bipartisan. And that is the kind of leadership that we need right now in this country more than ever. And I want to work with folks in all of our communities, whether it's an issue like George Floyd or whether it's COVID-19 and safely reopening the economy and how we do that. I'm willing to work with everybody who's willing to come to the table. And that is what's missing. We used to have it in Congress and it's gone. And I have not lost hope. I know if we get the right people in office, we can do it.
All right, I'm going to pause for a second. We want to thank everyone for watching and everyone tuning in. And look for us again in Tuesday. We'll be in Columbia, and we'll be doing the Joe Wilson race. He's got a Democratic challenger this year. He's our congressman up there.
Burrows.
Yeah, Derek Burrows. So look for that. That'll be 6 o'clock from Columbia. Same channels on the internet, and it'll be live. So right now, we're going to end things up here with our lightning round.
Okay.
And this is the quick succession of questions. And we're going to start with Andy going first.
Well, besides the Bible,
Okay.
what book are you reading? What book is on your nightstand right now that you're reading?
Amity Shlaes Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was just a common man that became president, and almost by accident, it's a fascinating read.
All right. Your personal view, should the Confederate flag that's now flying in the Summerall Chapel be removed, and does it belong there?
It should be in a museum somewhere. And I want to add a historic fact here while we're talking about it, if I can. But my father was commandant when this was an issue and was unable to remove the flag from the chapel during that time. It was the early 2000s. And he actually had it moved to the back of the chapel where fewer people could see it when they were in the chapel. And, you know, it's a historic artifact and belongs in a museum.
The House is poised to vote on the Marijuana Decriminalization Act. To vote on marijuana decriminalization by removing it from the Controlled Substances Act.
Right.
Substances Act. Sorry, say that 6 times fast
Yeah.
after a long work day.
Good luck.
States would then be free to obviously pass their own laws about what to do with marijuana. If you're in the House, do you support it?
100% support it. And I have been a big proponent of medical marijuana here in South Carolina and have sponsored such legislation and support decriminalizing.
All right, last question. Mustard or vinegar based?
Ooh. Where's the ketchup base? I grew up on ketchup base.
I was the one who threw that out. That too. There's a tomato base as well.
My
it's not a
family
fair
recipe
question.
is
I'm at
ketchup.
the party foul on
So
Skylar.
my family recipe is ketchup. So there you go.
And I'm from Columbia, so I have to support some sort of mustard base, I think, as well. But I'm a tomato base. I'm a tomato base
It would
too.
be against the law if you did not. Yeah. So,
Very good. We thank you all very, very much.
great. Thank you. Appreciate it so much.
Have a good night, everybody.